And joining me now is Danny Makki, a political commentator in Damascus, who heard some of the explosions around the city. Thank you for joining us. Firstly, what did you hear in terms of the airstrikes that were launched just a few hours ago?
So at around 4:30 in the morning here in Damascus, I'm based in a western stretch of the city, a series of loud bangs and consecutive strikes were heard, about 10 in total, as the first wave of US-led strikes on Syria began to occur. Instantly, it was clear that this was a US-led strike and very far away from the usual, typical, normal sounds of warfare in Damascus. You could tell that these were big missiles being fired, and the impact of these missiles falling was heard all across Damascus. So after the initial phase of about 10 to 12 missiles which initially fell, Syrian air defense stations and missiles in the surrounding area where I'm based started to fire tracer fire into the air to try and down these rockets, and S-200 air defense systems at these rockets which were landing in around Damascus. And what we could sense from the initial hours of the strike was that three main targets were struck within Damascus. The first of those in East Damascus, a research facility in Berzeh. The second, Mezzeh military airport, which is on the western stretch of the city as well. And the last target, which was supposedly attacked, although state media has denied it, is the research facility in Jemraya on the western outskirts of the city. Now, what we know from what Macron stated, the French president, a few days ago, is that most attacks would be limited to supposed research facilities regarding chemical weapons, and it seems that the attacks have been limited to those three particular sites. We have also heard reports from Homs and Hama of other attacks taking place, however that's still unconfirmed. What I can tell you now is that Russian jets are in the sky in Damascus and Qalamun and Homs in an attempt to ward off any potential further US-led strikes on Syria, and there is no death toll in regards to the strikes thus far. But what we do know is that there has been a lot of surprise and shock in Damascus in the early hours of this morning due to these strikes. I mean, just from a personal perspective, some of the strikes landed very close to where I'm based here. They created a huge sound with the neighborhood, and my house shook to the core. So you can tell that these strikes are not purely symbolic. They are targeting military installations around Damascus and have been relatively successful in doing so. Other additional information has suggested that a total of 13 rockets were supposedly downed by Syrian air defense forces. Now, that might perhaps seem an exaggeration at this point, but the fact that air defenses may have downed some rockets is relatively consistent with what I've been hearing over the previous hours of tracer fire being fired into the air and S-200 missiles being fired at rockets coming in. And what I can also tell you is that the strikes didn't just happen via rockets or missiles. I also heard several fighter jets in the air who were also targeting different areas in Damascus. So it's a double-pronged attack from missiles, reportedly from the American and other ships in the Mediterranean, and the air forces of these countries, which has obviously come from different states, probably Jordan or Qatar, etc. So it's a double-pronged attack, and as we see the impact from the damage of these strikes so far in Damascus, it's still unclear in terms of how many people have been killed, whether any people have been killed. State media initially reported that 3 civilians were wounded, but there hasn't been any information regarding that matter since then. But in the forthcoming hours, it will be interesting to see what kind of response is generated by Syria's allies, by Moscow, by Iran, by Hezbollah, and whether there will be a response in the forthcoming period. If there is, then it's likely it will be done in a very calm and collective manner, so as not to provoke a further escalation at this moment in time.
We know that the Assad regime has been locked in a fierce battle to retake eastern Ghouta near Damascus, near Assad's power base, and the one town left in that enclave is Douma, that still has a rebel presence there. Do you believe that these latest airstrikes might affect Assad's attempt to retake that rebel-held town?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, the problem in Douma at the moment is that the evacuation of Jaish al-Islam from Douma hasn't happened so far. you've had a huge set of evacuations which have taken place over the previous 2 days of 40,000 civilians and 8,000 Jaish al-Islam fighters. And this evacuation is set to be completed this morning or today. So from the perspective of Damascus, it's business as usual. You've got this UN committee, this group coming into Douma today to check out the location of the suspected chemical weapons attack. You've got no Syrian forces from the official army in Douma at the moment. As per the agreement, the only Syrian forces present in Douma are police forces and Russian military police who have been into the town, the last remaining rebel-held area of Eastern Ghouta. And that was yesterday. What I hear from the ground now is that there are only a couple of hundred of remaining Jaish al-Islam fighters, and that by some time today they would have left Douma completely towards Idlib and areas further north in Syria, at which time the rest of the Syrian police force will come in and declare the town under full government control. The Russians have been at the site of the suspected chemical weapons attack 2 days ago, so for the time being, the plans to evacuate the rest of the militants from Douma is still taking place. There's been no change to that particular process. It's set to continue, and any other information regarding the evacuation as of now is not correct, apart from the fact that it's the same as, and these Jaish al-Islam rebels will be evacuated to Jarablus today at some point, for sure.
You mentioned earlier the question as to how Assad might respond to these latest airstrikes, but another big question is whether or not the attacks actually took out Bashar al-Assad's chemical weapons capabilities. Certainly a similar attack last year didn't do that in any measure. Do you believe that these latest attacks might have impacted Assad's chemical weapons capabilities significantly this time round?
Well, it's very early to say what actual damage these attacks had on the research facilities which they targeted, and whether in fact these research facilities had any relation whatsoever to the issue of the accused issue of chemical weapons usage. The military facility in Berze is more of a research center for academic studies. The one in Jamraya, which was targeted, is far more likely to have some sort of impact on the chemical weapons issue. But it's clear that most of these bases or sites which were targeted would have been cleared of any significant technological equipment or warplanes, as in Mizeh military airport, days ago. So it's unlikely to see that these attacks would have had a huge impact on any sorts of capabilities present. But what we can gauge so far is that there has been an attack. So the attack itself may be seen from the view of Washington as a deterrent to Assad using these weapons in the future. But as said again, these investigations still need to be clearly assessed by the UN team, which is set to enter today. And that is also another reason why no one expected the US to target Syria today, because of the fact that you have this delegation from the chemical weapons group going into Douma today. It would have been more fathomable for the US to wait for their findings, or for them to leave these sites at the very least to begin some sort of attack. So in terms of pinning the blame on Assad, that's still unclear as to whether whatever the UN delegation sees and comes to a decision. I mean, if these attacks have been used, it's impossible that any remains of these gases used can be cleared from the scene. It's impossible. They remain for up to a month. So the UN definitely has an opportunity today, if they're still going to go to investigate the depth of these accusations and whether it's really true, or else any other investigations conducted by the Britain or France or the United States hasn't been internationally verified thus far. So you're basing it on strands of evidence for each individual country rather than a UN verified investigation. So it's important to see how that will develop over the next 48 hours.
Okay, Danny, Makki, we do appreciate your time. Thank you for that update from Damascus.